but with these complex identities, with labels, and with ways that are already sort of ways that are already cause sort of barriers to their openness and willingness. And so I came to Homeboy Industries about 13 years ago, and I came originally to work with women in gangs at Camp Scott at one of the youth detention facilities. And my role evolved as I started to do work in the field. I remember going into households and thinking, you know, at 23 I was thinking, because my own journey and my own transformation was through education and being the first in my family to go to school and get a college degree, that had to be everyone's journey. And what I learned was that I didn't know anything about what people needed, and that was critical. And when Luis talks about the mutual transformation that is part of that work, we have to be alive to what we know and what don't we know, and we have to be honest about what people need. And so one of the things that's been interesting is, so as I started to sort of learn and be out in the field, I started to notice that there's this idea that the girls and the boys that we were working with at detention facilities, no matter how much they wanted to go to school, there wasn't schools to receive them. And there was this idea out there that we gotta save the good kids from the bad kids, and the bad kids had to go to all of the schools where all the other probation kids were. And so for me, that was a real sort of interesting thing, and we started to see young people coming through our doors that wanted to have an academic identity too. They were bombarded with labels and messages about what they knew and what they didn't know. And so I sort of stepped back and with the help of the men and women I was working with, started to look at, how do we do this? How do we create safe learning spaces identity is not, and healing is not only accessible, but that it is also something that is possible and mutual. And so it's taken many years of work to get to this place, but it really started with the authentic desire to see people as everyone had a gift that they had to share, and really looking at it from a strength-based approach. And so we consciously didn't start with academic classes, even though people wanted that in some ways. We wanted to make sure we create safe spaces in which people were invited to own their voices, in which people were invited to look at what has happened in their life and what are the kinds of things that are alive in the classroom. For so many of the men and women we work with, we knew we had these windows of opportunity and they wanted to change. And one of the things that I started to notice was that they wanted to change when they were recently released, so they had just gotten out, and here's kind of an authentic, I want to start fresh. And then the other piece is they were going to be fathers or mothers. And that seemed to be sort of that open window of, I want to do it different, because no gang member, no man or woman I've ever met ever says this is the kind of life I want for my kids. They weren't always willing to do it for themselves, but I know that they've always, the dream for their children and the hunger for a better life means they were willing to be open. And even if it meant that they had to admit that they needed help. And so consciously we started to have small classes that really involved kind of listening what's going to work. And we started with some of the things that folks said that they needed, not what we wanted. And I think this is where pedagogies of transformation are important, that it's not just that, oh, we're going to start a class and everyone's going to give their notes. It's really consciously having conversations with the men and women we worked with to say, well, what is it that you think you need? Well, what would be really helpful? And in that way, we had an informed lens walking into the classroom. And we started to learn, what is it that people are carrying? They're carrying issues of grief and loss. Grief and loss that is probably postponed. There's trauma. And there are so many things that trump development. And I think when I started to be out in the field, specifically with kids, where schools were saying, hey, we don't want these kids, and they were being violated and going back into the system, we started to say, how do we engage them, and how do we create spaces in which we start to offer classes in which they can again re-identify and say that they are good at something. So we started tutoring and GED classes, and we started parenting and small circles. Fahima is here, and she's one of our therapists there. And I remember one of our early circles that we started was called Pláticas, and it was just like a small group that got together, and then we started to have retreats. And so when we think about education, a lot of times we think about, you know, all this academic stuff, but education is really what is alive in here, and how do we take what we already know? There's formal education, and there's the experiences of men and women that are valid and that are fruitful and that can teach things, so that we change the sort of this intergenerational cycle of violence. And that begins with an invitation to say, who are you at the core? And how do we have those conversations? So I want to go to the next slide. So this is sort of in 2007 when we opened our building. This is what our schedule looked like. And so we had classes called Self-Development. And so we started with a class about dreams. What is your dream? And so part of it, again, is an invitation to say, yeah, you had a dream. What was that? And we did have experiences where a lot of people said, well, I don't know what that is. I've never thought, no one's ever asked me that. And so it's beginning to ask questions and starting to stimulate ways of looking and thinking about a future. And that really involved, going back to the earlier slide, this idea of, if our goal in education was to help people shift paradigms, then we had to create a community in which people shifted from survival, from every day worrying about where am I going to lay my head, how am I going to eat, how am I going to feed my children, to a place of thriving. And that could only happen if we were helping them with a job, with helping them with other sort of resources to really help them begin to be available in the classroom. And so as we started to develop the classes there, we knew one thing was true, and that is that we couldn't start our classes with assessments. And I want to just say that because I think that's really important. Luis referred this in his story, and when he talked about people come with an informed lens and experiences in public school that are real for them. And so you can't just say someone, come on, give it a shot. This is good. As people have had experiences at really young ages that were not positive. And so when we talk about assessments, we got to make sure that we're not, if you ask people, what is it that, how many of you are good at math in here? How many of you are good at math? Raise your hand. Okay, a few people. How many of you are good writers? Okay, so we do that, and I saw some hands up and some hands here and some hands here. And part of that is identity. How do you identify? We have to, again, when we talk about cultural competency, this is not just about race and gender. It's about understanding what do people walk into the classroom with, and understanding that labels have been put on folks that then are internalized. And so what if we were to ask people, we start to think about this, what are you good at? Instead of assessments that started to say, well, this is the reading level of someone, this is the assessment level. The folks that we started, the men and women we started to work with already knew that. They weren't good test takers. They had already been bombarded by these experiences, so we had to change that and really create classes in which their experiences were honored. What did they know? What did they know they were good at? We had good artists, we had people who were, for as much as they were able to be vulnerable, and they had courage that I had never seen or witnessed in any other sort of community. And that to me was sort of when I started to change my way of thinking about what does education mean. So now today, this is where our classes are, and I want to pass it to Luis to talk a little bit of how we develop, but we've grown and developed in response to not what we think is good for men and women, but what we say they need for their life. And so we have certificate classes and life skills classes, but we also have support groups and other educational classes that really have helped people, again, develop and re-identify with who they are at the center.
So a lot of times we'll have people on tours or visitors, people who need, want to know a little bit about more what we do, right? One of the things they always ask us is, well, what's your curriculum like?
Right.
Or what theoretical framework do you use? And you know, I've done a little bit of research on that, and I have that, but I think more importantly is Shirley hit it on the head there when she said, you know, what the community needs is what we're gonna try to adjust to provide, right? And so some of the needs are, on Monday morning we have a class called Monday Morning Meditation. It's run by a therapist. It's run by Father Mark, right? And some people say meditation, and if you go into that space, you'll see it's not a conventional meditation that's happening, right? But for some people, just sitting in a space, trying to be quiet and focused is huge, right? Especially when staying, that triggers all these other things, right? That silence, it's connected to so many other things that a lot of folks can't even fathom what that is, because they've never been there, right? So we start our week off with that class. In between we have a plethora of classes. We have court-mandated classes like parenting, anger management, domestic violence classes, substance abuse classes. We end the week, right, with a couple classes, but one particular who happens to be Fahima's class, right? That is a class that is called Dancing Heels, right? And it's a class that deals with trauma, believe it or not. It deals with how trauma is lodged in your body, how we carry and package that, and then releasing it is with movement, right? A lot of times people are like, what? And you see, right? And if you listen to the stories of the people who go into this class, right? Some people will say, I've never moved my body, I've never danced without being high or without being drunk. Like, that was the only way I associated that. Other people was like, I don't do that because when I was a kid, right, that's all I saw. And it always ended up in some fight, right? My relatives getting drunk and then there's a fight in the house, right? So I don't dance. And then other people think, oh, I don't dance, eh? Right? I remember there was this guy, some of you know who I'm talking about. He used to come into the class with his shades on too, big pants up to here, creased up. An older gentleman, and he used to stand like this and just watch the dance, right? And I would always tell him, he would make fun of me. He'd tell me, man, I can't believe you dance, bro. And I used to tell him on the side. He wouldn't even let other people hear him telling me that. And I would tell him, you should dance. And he says, I am. And I was like, you can't see it, homie, but when I'm right there, I'm like really dancing. And but to him, that was dancing, right? And it was one step. And that was able to happen because of that transformative piece that we're offering, right? And that's one of the classes that on Friday you know it's happening because you can hear the music from like no matter where you are in the buildings, right? You hear like, yeah, woo, and so, but a lot of people confuse that, right? They think, like sometimes they'll say, oh, Dancing Heels, woo, as if that, you know, that is happening in there, but it's really deeper than that, right? There's so much more. Right? There's so much more going on. This next slide, it talks about our educational philosophy, right? And a lot of times people ask that, right? Especially academic people, researchers will come in and say, well, what's your academic philosophy? Or what, like I said, what theoretical frameworks do you use to inform your work and curriculum? And I've wrestled with this because I think that what we do, right, hasn't even been written about in academia, right? So when I think about, well, so what are we doing, right? So we came together as a group of department heads and other community members, other staff members, and we put together this committee and we started teasing out the work that we do. And one of the things that we came up with was this impact statement, right? And the impact statement that we came up with was that our work is to increase awareness of personal power and capacity to contribute in a meaningful and positive way to family, workplace, and the world at large. Now, that just sounds really pretty, right? I always think that's a great statement, but what does it mean and how does it look like? We're going to get to that, right? And I put our mission statement there because together you see that there's a lot of similarities of what the entire mission of the agency is with this impact statement, right? And the mission statement is Homeboy Industries provides hope, training, and support to formerly gang-involved and previously incarcerated men and women, allowing them to redirect their lives and become contributing members of our community, right? Those two statements together, like, that's huge. And how do you do that, right? And like I said in this other learning circles that we had, there's many platforms, there's many avenues, there's many ways, right? And not everybody's going to use one. It's multiple, and there's so many layers, and it's also very mutual, right? This next slide, because we lost half the class, is not all the class. Right? We can't come in and thinking, well, I have all these letters behind my name. I've gone to school, I've done this, I've done that. I'm going to tell you what you need to know because I have the information that you need in order to improve your life. If you go about it like that, it's a wrap. We don't do that, right? The answers and the medicine needed is all in the room. And it's not just lodged in my heart or in my mind. It's amongst everybody, right? So how do you have that kind of conversation? What kind of teaching method are you gonna use in order for that to come out? Like, it can't be the kind that I come in as the expert and let me tell you guys what you need to know. It can't be that, because in our community, that won't work. And I've seen it happen before. You know, volunteers with a good heart, really wanting to help, right? But they're in there for, I want to save a homie, and I'm there. I'm here to like transform someone's life. Like that, you just, you know, come back when you're ready, brother, too, right? Because you're not ready yet. Because if you come with that in your mind, then you're gonna just lose half half of the magic that Shirley was talking about, right? And that magic is mutual. So I have to be just as open, right, and ready to receive information and learn as much as anybody else sitting in the room, including that young man in the back that can't get off of his phone, including that young lady in the back that keeps sending notes to the individual next to the person sitting next to her, or including that guy that keeps nodding off on the other side, including the person that can't stop looking out the window, right? And so on and so forth, right? And me not be able to take that personal and say they're not listening, because it goes back to that story I shared, right? The assumptions that we make. Now, also at the same time, not be naive. Those are people you want to check in with at some point, right? Those are people who it's going to take them a while to sit like this, to sit like this, to sit like this, to be like, yeah, I know about that. I read about that before. And now you have them in a conversation. But if I would have written them off from the moment they were like this, I would have lost that person, right? And not only would I have lost that person, but I would have not had an opportunity to learn, like me, right? So I looked at critical pedagogy, but I use this this theoretical framework only to address when people say, what theoretical framework do you use? Well, I say, you know what, we're most aligned with critical pedagogy, but I really believe that there is no theoretical framework that can really capture the work the way that we do it, because it's so rich and deep. There's spirit in it, right? A lot of these theoretical frameworks are based on oppressive conditions, political conditions, ideologies that are based on those kind of black and white kind of determining factors. What we do is multifaceted. You know what? There is prayer, right? There is prayer involved. And they're like, well, what kind of religious affiliation is it? Oh, you see, now you're going back to kind of like saying the theoretical. You're doing that. You're trying to put something in a box. And we're not in that box, right? We could be, we step in it and we step out of it because curriculum and theoretical frameworks help. But we're not stuck and married to it completely, because we need to be able to have open and listen to the voices that are never really listened to, that sometimes these theoretical frameworks don't even include, right? In fact, most of the time they don't, right? So critical pedagogy is based on Paulo Freire's work, and that it's evolved from its very beginning, right? It's evolved, it's changing, and some of the things that we're doing is we're actually part of that kind of change, right? So this Paulo Freire says that one of the central tenets of critical pedagogy is the establishment of classrooms in which teachers and students learn together. Right off the bat, that's Homeboy Industries. That's what I'm talking about, that mutuality, right? Where we're learning together. Like, I don't have all the answers, but this individual, wow, that was freaking brilliant. Like, I learned so much from this person and that person and that person, and it's mutual, and everyone's bouncing back and forth with all these ideas, and the room is alive. We have a class called Criminals and Gang Members Anonymous that is run in a way that is just, it's hard to put any kind of theoretical perspective on that. Why? Because it's the knowledge is in the room and it's coming up and it's alive, and our facilitator for that is here too. Right? I'll share a little bit about that in a little bit. Paulo Freire also says is to learn, is to recreate the way we see ourselves. That's Homeboy Industries right there. Right? Our relationship to classroom space needs to change. Right? And we don't have the answer for that, but we have it collectively. Right? And we dignify individuals. Right? We ask, what do you know about that? Like, what do you think? And the answer might not be, I don't know. I wasn't even tripping on that. That might be the answer. And that's a great answer, right? But if you're at the point where it's like, no, that's not good enough, then it becomes back to that dynamic where it triggers that negative kind of relationship you've always had to education, where if I don't know something, then I must be dumb, and it goes back to that, triggers more stuff. The next thing you know, you're completely shut off, and you're like, F that fool's whack, I'm out, and you don't ever come back like spiritually into that space. Last, also part of critical pedagogy, Paulo Freire, and this quote is probably one of my favorites, he says, authentic help means that all who are involved help each other mutually, growing together in the common effort to understand the reality which they seek to transform, right? And if we're in this work to change the way that we see one another, then we're in this work to change the way we see one another, right? That's it, that's the work. And what does that mean? That means that our classroom space has to resemble that, has to be that way too. Right? That means that I don't have all the answers. That means that we have answers collectively. And we can tease things out. And you create an environment where you do that, right? So your comment earlier about, not being the only one, that hierarchy that you're talking about, that gets erased, right? And it becomes a flowing dialogue, right? And that's not easy to do, it's hard. Sometimes it'll fall on its head, right? Because that day, it goes back to feeling the pulse. That day, there was so much energy in the room, and energy that didn't meet, that wasn't in line with what was happening in that classroom. So something could have happened on the weekend. Somebody could have had an argument outside that we didn't know about. So now those people are in your classroom, and everyone's like, and so here you are trying to talk about like, oh yeah, so what does self-sabotage mean, bros? And everyone's like, not even thinking about that, right? They don't even want to engage in that. Right? They're more thinking about, hey, I don't know, man, but I don't like how that fool came at me. Right? My navigator's tripping. And don't trip, bro. And that's the conversation. But I want to talk about self-sabotage. I'm like, well, what about self-sabotage? And they're like, I'm not even worried about that right now. I'm trying to not go out and knock out my navigator.
Which would be huge, self-sabotage.
Yeah, and so there it is. So then how do you have the savvy, right, to kind of say, you gotta think quick, all right? You know what? I'm gonna throw it to Beto, for example. Beto, what do you think about this? And I know that he might have something to say. If he doesn't, then, oh, what about you, Luis? What do you think? My name's not Luis, my name is Luis. Okay, all right, Luis. And so then laughter's big, right? Our community likes to laugh. So you have to be able to go from like real deep moments and then kind of bring them back over here, some laughter, and then some more information. It can't be too academic because then you lost half the people, and then you have to be over here, then you have to code switch. You have to be doing that all the time, and it's tiring, right? So you can't do it by yourself. If one person tries to do that, they'll burn out. That's why it's about the entire group, right? And everybody's participating in whatever way that they are, right? So that's
earlier I had mentioned that we always have to be aware of what's alive, and that people don't walk into these educational spaces or classes with sort of just a blank, you know, open lens, a willingness, that their lens is colored with experiences. And that is so true also for the facilitator. And that's one of the things when we talk about mutuality and we talk about checking the pulse of what's it like for people. But as a facilitator, because you're holding so much intention, you have to be careful of what's alive in you that day. What are you grappling with, and how do you stay centered and do your own work? Someone brought up self-care earlier in one of our learning circles, and it's so important that if you don't check your own pulse, then how are you going to be an anchor when things get chaotic in the classroom, as they always do? I mean, we're living in tension, always, and we're trying to figure out how do we, as we said, how do we sort of weave in objectives or new things, but how do we invite laughter? How do we experience joy and feelings that are unfamiliar? How do we create windows of relief for people who don't know where they're going to stay tonight, who don't know if they're you know, struggling with how are they're really struggling with things and they're being triggered. So it's important as that this is when we talk about mutual transformation and classrooms being that, we have to be aware as teachers, as facilitators, as what's it like for me? What am I going through in my life? And how does that come into the classroom? Because it bleeds in, and if you're not aware, and if you don't have a way to look at it, then you could dismiss that person that may not know how to read. You could say that that person, and Pablo Freire, I love that we are using him in these ways, because he has a sort of philosophy that says that, you know, the reading of the world comes before the reading of the word. And so if you're not aware of things, and you're not willing to fall when things fall apart, when your agenda's not working, when the plan you created, if you're not willing to be vulnerable and be alive to that moment, you could lose, you lose those rich opportunities. And so I think it's really important for us to make sure that we say what we do, and that means that if we're a community that doesn't write people off, that we check our own temperature, because we're human beings. And when we're in that place, we could be that person that writes someone off and sees them through a certain lens. So I just wanted sort of to add that to the conversation that we're having.
And that's an excellent segue to our next slide, which is about cultural context and cultural competency, right? And what does that really mean, right? Well, first of all, right, we know that we're part of a strength-based approach, right? So we're all teachers and we're all students, right? And everybody's where they're at, it matters, right? So again, it might be a kid that is in the back of the room that you assume is not listening, right? And sometimes, you know what, he's not, or she's not, maybe they're not. That's where they're at. And it's hard to run a group or facilitate a class when about 5 or 6 people in the class are in that space, right? But who's in your classroom? It's a question I always ask. As soon as people walk in, and if I have relationships with them, it's not a setup for me. It's actually a plus now. I kind of know a little bit about what this person's going through. I kind of know a little bit about this person's background. I kind of know a little bit about their educational kind of relationship in terms of classroom, right? I kind of know that, right? So relationships is huge, right? Our work at Homeboy Industries is really about relationships, and Father Boyle talks about kinship, right? He talked about this morning that paradise is right here and now, right? So that moment, right? That moment, it's just as important as what you have set for the day, the plan, right? So if you skip that moment and just go to your plan, then you just lost. You forgot about who's in the room, right? Another question is, what do the folks in the space bring to the classroom, right? What do they know? What are they bringing in, right? This, in theoretical terms, this is a concept. It's not necessarily a theory. Funds of knowledge, right? And it was created by Luis Moll. And their definition of funds of knowledge is defined by funds of knowledge as knowledge, skills, and practices that are accumulated, culturally developed, which facilitate the functioning and well-being of households and individuals. Now, you think, what? like, how does that apply to Homeboy Industries, right? And basically, in a nutshell, is that the people that are coming to our spaces, they're rich. They have so much information and so much experience, right? That's worth so much, and we can use that to help develop what we're doing in that classroom space. Basically, that's what that's saying, right? And then we look at community context. Well, who's in our classrooms, right? You have individuals that have done extensive prison terms, in and out, right? Tattoos, adverse relationship with classroom space. And they're sitting in your classroom, right? And now if you come at them like, okay, please open your book to or here's the handout that we have for today. We're going to read section number 1. Can you please read that? That person might not know how to read. And if you don't know that, you just put someone on blast, right? You just put someone on the spot. Basically, you're telling them to read something and they can't, right? A lot of times they'll be like, I'm cool. And like these different things start popping up. And if you don't know, then you're like, wow, they're not listening, right? Like, bro, you just put someone on the spot. Like, you didn't do it on purpose, right? So how do you do that, right? You have individuals that have not completed a certain amount of grade level, right? And you have them stand up in front of a group of people and try to like explain something, like say, okay, can you explain what I meant by this? Like, right? You have to know who's in your room, right? These are some pictures of different spaces that we have. Learning from the heart, a couple of those. I take a lot of individuals with me to co-facilitate college courses. I take them with me. And I tell them, you're not coming to tell your story, bro. You're not going to come to the class to say all the things you've done in the past. That's not why you're coming to the classroom. You're coming to the classroom to speak about leadership and what that means, and how you can help these individuals understand what leadership means, internal leadership, transformational leadership. So we're not going to talk about, like, I went to prison for 10 years, I was in the SHU. We're not going to talk about that. That's not why. You're not an exhibit. You're there to inform these individuals on how and what it means and how it looks like to work with our community. That's what you're going to do. You're going to lecture college students, graduate students. You're going to do that, right? And if they ask any questions, we'll wait for them outside.
Louise.
Yes.
What? So somebody, you screw up, I screw up, not you. You wouldn't screw up. I would. And I do put somebody on the spot, and they can't read. Am I going to help teach them how to read? Do you have the resources within your organization to provide that help?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
We have an extensive tutoring program. Right? We have a GED program. We have a high school, and we have a high school diploma.
And the way you kind of come to know that about a person is through this openness and mutuality in a classroom.
Creating, again, if we create spaces in which people feel safe, and they go from this to this to that, they will tell you what they need. And I think that's what you're waiting for. You're not waiting for it to enlighten anyone, or you're waiting for the moment in which they're open and they open the window and they let their guard down and they're willing to ask for help. And I think that matters, and that's really important, and that we do it in a way we've failed many times. And I think that's important to say, that we've tried to do literacy circles, literacy classes to address these things, because we have people who can read and are college ready, and we have people who, again, they're literate in the world and not in the word. And so what we have learned is that works best, and there's a lot of shame around that, but that works best one-on-one. Yeah. And we've started to develop sort of these different levels of willingness to be open about what you need, and do it in a way that's dignified. Thank you.
So some of the short-term impact short-term impact that we have in our community. And when we did this committee, we came up with this list, and it's actually more than this, but I highlighted 3: relief, ability to thrive, and family reunification. All of them are just as important. But relief, I wanted to talk briefly about that, because relief it's more like you think, oh, relief, I made it to this class. It's more like relief, like I'm actually able to sit in a class now, right? Like that type of relief, like the relief that it's not that bad, right? Ability to thrive, right? Ability to be in a classroom space and start making progress. Right? GED is a great example of that, where people come in and say, man, I'm never going to get a GED. And as time goes on, they start realizing, like, I got that. And it's not just about getting the GED, it's about, I finished this math problem that I thought I'd never do. I thought I'd never be able to sit down and get through it, right? And family reunification, a lot of our community's immediate need is that they've lost their kids. And so they need to take this parenting class, right? And they need to have some kind of tools that they can use when they get their kids back, because it gets only harder then, right? So that's like some of the short-term impacts. The long-term impacts that we have as we provide educational services is that paradigm shift that we were talking about in an earlier session, that moving from surviving to thriving, right? To have a vision and a plan for the future, right? And more importantly, and just as valid as the rest of these points, is to have an increased sense of self, to realize that you matter, right? And that doesn't only come from what you teach; it comes from the spaces that we create, right? The next slide, it really addresses some of the core issues that we have. And this is going to, it's a segue to a really brief group activity that we have. That's for you guys, right? So these are, this committee that we put together really kind of like teased out and really dug deep into what are some of the issues, the core issues that we see at Homeboy when our community comes into our space, right? And we separated it into 5 key categories. And the first one is education. Such things as the GED, the high school diploma, literacy, which is what your question was about. Some folks, their issue is they want to go into post-secondary, higher education. Other folks want trade skills, training. Some people are looking at health education and sex education. The category with life skills and challenges. You know, Shirley mentioned some of these: homelessness, finances, legal issues, poverty, coping skills, behavior, family breakdown. The parenting section, recovery and substance abuse is huge within our community. These are core issues that we deal with, right? Then there's the mental health piece. People come in with anxiety. Traumas are huge. Right? Depression, grief, and loss. There's shame. That in that clip that we have, that at Homeboy we live shame, right? Trust, impulsivity, self-esteem is low, addictions, lack of focus. The next category is personal development. So people have issues of identity. Like, I've been a gang member all my life, right? I've been such and such from this neighborhood all my life, right? And for the first time in my life, someone's not calling me this name. Now I'm Luis, right? And I don't have to wear the big pants. I don't have to do the certain things I used to do. I don't have to do that. And for some people, that's a difficult one, because that's who you've always been, right? And all of a sudden now you're being addressed as Miguel or David, right? Or Pedro. You're not being addressed as who you were all your life, right? So there's this identity, right? Then some people have been locked up for a long time, and in there, their identity was completely different. And now they're in classroom space. Now they're at Homeboy. How do we address that, right? Sexuality is a big issue, gender, gang lifestyle, and vision, right? What vision do you have? And the last one is relationships, which is also just as huge as the rest. Boundaries, right? And us as folks that are working at Homeboy, how do we create those boundaries with one another that are healthy, right? So we don't find ourselves my friend and co-worker and family member, Joe, always talks about, don't get in that car. How do I get in that? Do I get in that car or not, right? And that's something that in the past, for some folks, it's like, hey, can you give me a ride? Let's go, big dog. And you're not even worried about whether they have a strap or they have a gun with them or they have drugs. You're not worried about that. Let's go. But now you get to the point where you're like, hey, if you have anything on you, bro, I can't give you a ride. Or I'm not getting in the car because I know that it could mean that I'm putting my own freedom at risk, right? Those are the kind of conversations. For some people, it's like, you don't even think about that. Can I have a ride? Oh, how sweet, thank you. And you go, right? But in our community, you have to think, well, damn, what does that mean? Like, are you going to make a stop? Are you going to stop at the liquor store? Are you going to go to the hood first? Like, you got to think about that kind of stuff, right? Some of the other relationship issues, power and control, communication, violence, parenting, antisocial behavior, conflict resolution, trust, and codependency, right? These are all core issues that we deal with at Homeboy Industries. Last, based on that, those are the issues that we deal with at Homeboy, right? So we're not going to break off into groups, but just as a question to the group here, right, to kind of get this conversation going is, what are some of the core issues that are prevalent in your community in the work that you do? And that's a question to everybody. And the second part of that is, right, how have you developed your classroom strategies, your pedagogy, your curriculum to address those particular needs, right? And that, I'll open it up to anybody who wants to tackle that. So what are some of the core issues that other agencies have dealt with?
Well, Fathers and Families, I just finished up one for people living with chronic illness and disease, HIV, cancer, diabetes, all that. Guys that just came home for their families. And it really affects a lot because some of the kids come in, their mother may have diabetes, their father has hypertension, and it's a lot of stress, they're trying to avoid the medications, they're dealing with this, and it really affects them. So teach a course on how to eat better nutrition, how to go about getting nutrition, and exercise, just general things to do to promote well-being for themselves as well as for their family members, and giving them an awareness of the illnesses that may be.
What would you say would be perhaps the most salient challenge that you've had to teach that? What has been the challenge?
Most difficult challenge is getting into the classrooms and getting in there and to focus in on the stuff.
All right. Anybody else? Other agencies?
One of the things that came to mind while you were talking, and I think it's the same, is helping to elicit the ability to dream just from the beginning. Like, when my identity has been built to be this, you ask me what I want to do with my life, I will have no idea how to answer that. And if I do, it'll be like what some really nice teacher told me I was good at, like, oh, you should be a nurse. So I would say a nurse. But to truly elicit the truth of what people really want to do with their lives, that I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you do that in a classroom and how to make it true, not just like what somebody said I should do.
And I think for me, right, I think that's a process.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have much of a relationship with someone and you go to that question right away, like, they're going to give you that response, right? Whatever first pops into their mind or what they think that they should do. For example, you'll ask someone, well, what do you want to do during your time here at Homeboy? And a lot of folks say, like, fuck, I don't know, and that's where they're at. And other people will be like, I want to do solar panel.
Right.
And you're like, okay. And they're like, I want to do solar panel because they know that we have that, right? And they know, maybe I can do solar panel, right? And other people will be like, I want to be a chef. But they never even thought about being a chef before, right? So we don't know whether or not that's something they really want to do.
Right.
Or, you know what? maybe, okay, we're gonna put you in the kitchen and see how you feel. Damn, I hate it. I hate the kitchen. I don't want to be a chef. Like, I don't want to be a chef. I think I'm gonna try to work.
Joe has some.
There's also something that I use, right, is with short-term realistic goals, right? You know, and maybe it's getting a driver's license, maybe it's getting off parole or probation, maybe it's getting your first apartment, you know, and because those small, because like in our community, a lot of those are first, you know, which are so normal to the outside community. ID drivers, like we've had guys come home and never had a social security card. We guys have people that come home have never been to the DMV, you know. So getting those little short-term, you know, realistic or tangible things, you know, then they start to grow into like other things. You know what I'm saying? Because when I got to Homeboy, like that was, I had this little. Now I'm working on my credit score because I want a house. But 7 years ago, that wasn't part of my plan. I just wanted to get off parole. I got off parole. I got off probation. You know, and I'm my 640. I'm trying to get to 800. But when I got here, that language, a lot of people from our community don't even know.
Help them light up. And how do we help them kind of walk with them? And again, what happens outside the classroom matters. And all these things that Joe mentioned, I think are a good window into how people build their trust, their engagement, and begin to imagine what's possible for them.
I just want to add on, you know, it's true, our dreams change. I mean, as a kid, I dreamt of being a fireman, then I want to change it to being a police officer. Then I became a gang member, and I changed it to being the best gang member I could possibly be. Now I'm an English professor. But what stayed consistent was your determination, your commitment to accomplishing that goal. And it does begin with small goals. So it's steps, it is a process. Because, you know, I teach at the college level, and students will come in with one goal, and by the end of the semester, they'll totally change it to something else. First they'll come in and be a nurse, but then they are open to new things. You know, we take them to museums, to different universities. And next thing you know, they want to become a lawyer. So it changes. But what stays consistent is the hard work. You got to give them the reality. Look, a dream, you know, as we know it in fairy tales, that it's just close your eyes and when you open them, wow, there's your prince and there's your castle. It doesn't happen like that. It's hard work, it's labor, and it takes years to accomplish.
The determination. And so I remember early on when I was working with the young women that were locked up, I remember hearing so many of their stories of like, you know, they had gotten caught for this, but all the times they didn't get caught for things. And their thinking, and I mean, they were brilliant. The way they thought about getting away and, you know, masterminding all these things, like, wow, you're so bright and gifted. And you can use that in ways to channel other things. But again, how do we help them use those gifts in these positive ways?
There's no cookie cutting process, you know, for an application of learning. You know, we have different styles of learning. I'm slow, kinetic. You know, we listen, we visual. You can show me something one time and I got it. You know what I mean? And then, you know, you have other folks that you may not be able to read a book and not even read the whole chapter and get A on the test. You know what I mean? So you have different levels of education. You know what I mean? An educational way that what makes it so valuable that in a classroom setting, I don't just have your perspective, but your perspective or my perspective. I got 30 different other perspectives and I never looked at it in the way that you were talking about it. Like, you know what I'm talking about? You might see it, well, what about this? I mean, if you would probably, you know, try that or explore that even a little more, you came up with this particular solution. You know what I'm saying? And I'd be able to look at that and everybody else would capture that as well. Because we never looked at it like that. That's what makes the classroom stand much more richer about information that is given in the classroom.
And I think it alleviates this feeling of alienation. Like, I'm the only one that doesn't know ... Or I'm the only one that failed ... And when all of a sudden you're in the group and someone has the courage to say something that maybe you didn't have the courage to voice or feel, it validates, wow, I'm not alone in this. I'm not alone in the struggle. I'm not, there's other people that feel this way, so I may not be that bad, you know? I mean, it becomes these sort of conversations that then begin to do exactly what you're saying, which is sort of open your worldview and your perspective.
Yes, that's one of the major things I always tell them to is always be accountable. Be accountable for yourself. And sometimes that's
What do you mean? What do you mean be accountable?
well, what I'm saying is like, for instance, you got the sack and all that. You have to be accountable for your character. That's how you got your money. So nowadays you be accountable for your progression, how to progress. Stand by and stand on what you're doing. But I also let them know I'll be accountable for you. You be accountable for me, you be accountable for each other. We learn, we grow, and we get ahead. But the main thing is to be accountable.
So one of the hardest questions I've ever heard at Homeboy was about 9 months into it, and Jacob asked me, what do I want to be when I grow up? And I was stuck, probably for about a minute and a half. It's just, and I'm a visual learner too. I learned that at Homeboy. I can see something and I'll learn from it by if you walk me through it. So, and dreams do change, because if you've done 20 years like I have, I lost the capability to dream. I lost that because I had to snuff that out because I didn't know if I was ever going to get out. So how am I going to dream about something that I've always seen on TV, like interaction between friends? I actually watched the TV show Friends. This is how social people act out here, because they don't act the same way in here. There are two different responses. So I had to learn how to live in society. So Homeboys is my little piece of heaven. And I read Father G's book, and just somehow I got placed at Homeboys. And about 9 months into it, Jacob calls me and he goes, I want you to take this class with me. And it was kind of a trip because I was quiet throughout the whole class, and I like to talk a lot. And I was quiet throughout the whole class, and he looks at me and goes, hey, what do you want to be? And I've never had nobody ask me a question like that. And I was like stuck. I couldn't open my mouth. I started getting sweaty. And Jose as soon as said, you've done a lot of time in prison, right? And I was like, yeah. He goes, you scared of the ocean? And it was a trip the way this conversation formed itself, because I've always wanted to get out to the platforms. But just this happened, I couldn't get a TWIG card, an OSHA card, blah, blah, blah. Anyways, my whole point being, he opened that dream back up that I had forgot about so many years ago, to where I was like, man, I want to do that. And it just opened that up. But to answer your question, I think you have to like baby step the person and hold his hand and ask him, well, what do you think about when you were a kid, and what fascinates you? I mean, what are you passionate about? Because 90% of the time they're not going to tell you, because they forgot. And it's like a teacher once told us, I'm not really teaching you nothing, I'm just helping you remember what you already know. And this is, a lot of us have had a lot of time sitting in cells to get lost and I don't know, a daydream, call it whatever you might, but they can actually be passionate. But like I said, there's felonies, so it's the, okay, like if I had a driver's license, I would love to drive. I would love to drive in town, but there's little steps I'm gonna need to take.
I think that's one of the things too we've recently learned as part of our MOT, how we move the trainees through the 18-month model, and it's, you know, it's two different questions. Do you have a driver's license, and do you know how to drive? Because some people know how to drive, don't have a driver's license. Others have a driver's license but are still learning how to drive. But it's, again, we're all sort of learning.
Yeah, well, when I first came to Homeboys, one of the big things I wanted to do was get a driver's license. But now, not being able to read, I knew it was going to be something real hard for me, you know? And I'll fall back into that, and I know how to read a label right there. I got there and I talked to Brittany. She took me up to Steve, and I had Steve, my tutor. He's a great guy. Now he's also my friend, you know? And my reading level was real low, so I was petrified going to the DMV. I was like, man, I have to pay, and then I'm gonna fail, and you know, all that stuff that comes with that. And once I got it with Steve, he
started telling me we could do this. And for me, that was like one of those things like, man, I'm gonna drive illegally because I'm so scared of trying to go in and fail my license. So, so once I started getting into it, I had Steve and other people at Homeboy help me, tutor me through all the DMV process. I went, I missed only one. You know, I went, I missed one, but I think they let me continue to believe in myself, because the whole time I was doubting myself. I was just doubting myself all through the process. And right before that, I had my friend Jose. He like you guys said, yeah, you know how to. Now I can do the test, but do I know how to drive? I haven't drove. He took me to the DMV. I told him, this is the DMV I made the appointment for. We drove around the whole thing in circles. And he's like, they're gonna take you somewhere right here. You're gonna test somewhere right here. And we drove around, and I ended up driving the same spots he took me to drive. That's what I ended up driving through. And he helped me through that, and I'm so grateful for that, because it's one of those. It might not mean a lot for somebody, but for me it meant a lot to be able to have my driver's license and to actually be legit on whatever I'm doing. It's priceless to me, and I'm